They laughed at old Farmer Jack in 1989 when he handed a broken tractor key to an orphan boy nobody wanted. The tractor barely ran. Jack could have sold it for parts, and half the county said he was throwing away what little he had left on a boy who would probably disappear before winter. But 35 years later, when that same boy came back down Jack's lane with 3 restored tractors behind him, every person who had laughed had to stand there and watch what one act of kindness had built. Back in the fall of 1989, Jack Mercer was not the kind of farmer people called rich. He owned 42 acres outside Willow Creek, an old equipment shed with a roof that leaked over the west beam, a weathered farmhouse with a porch that leaned just enough to worry visitors, and a collection of machines most farmers would have already sold for scrap. Jack was 56 then, though the years on his face made him look older. He had a gray beard that never stayed trimmed, hands darkened by grease and soil, and a habit of listening longer than most men talked. People in Willow Creek respected him, but they did not always understand him. Jack had a way of keeping things others threw away. Old bolts, cracked belts, bent drawbars, broken gauges, rusted fenders, parts from machines whose names had faded from their badges years before. He always said, "A thing ain't dead just because somebody got tired of fixing it." That was the kind of sentence people smiled at, then forgot. But one boy never forgot it. His name was Caleb Reed. Caleb was 13 years old in 1989, thin as a fence rail, with brown hair that always needed cutting, and eyes that watched everything without asking for anything. By then, everyone in town knew his story, though most of them only knew the version they repeated over coffee. His mother had died when he was little. His father, a mechanic who drifted from job to job, had been killed in a highway accident the previous winter. With no close family willing to take him in, Caleb ended up staying with a distant aunt on the edge of town. She fed him. She gave him a roof. But everyone could tell he wasn't wanted there. He walked to school in boots too big for him. He wore the same green flannel jacket, even when the cuffs frayed white. And after school, instead of going straight home, he wandered the roads between farms, scrap yards, machine sheds, and fence lines. Some boys collected baseball cards. Caleb collected the sounds of engines. He could tell when a tractor was missing on one cylinder. He knew the difference between a loose belt squeal and a dry bearing. He could stand near a machine he had never touched and listen like it was speaking. But people did not see that. They saw an orphan boy hanging around equipment. They saw trouble before they saw talent. At Miller's feed store, men would pause their conversations when Caleb walked in. "Keep an eye on your tools," one of them muttered once. Another said, "Boy like that grows up with nobody guiding him. He'll either run off or steal something." Caleb heard it. He always heard it, but he never answered. He just lowered his eyes, bought a bottle of soda if he had change, and walked out before anyone could see his face change. The only farm where Caleb felt he could stand still was Jack Mercer's. Jack's place sat at the end of a gravel lane lined with old maples. There was a sagging barn on the north side, a chicken coop behind the smokehouse, and a machine shed that smelled of oil, dust, and hay. And behind that shed, half covered by a torn canvas tarp, sat the tractor. It was an old red tractor with faded paint, cracked rubber, a dented hood, and one rear tire that held air only when it felt like it. The steering wheel was split down the middle. The seat was torn. The engine had not turned over properly in 2 years. Most people called it junk. Caleb called it beautiful, though only in his head. Every afternoon, he found a reason to pass Jack's place. At first, he only slowed near the fence. Then he started stopping. Then one day, Jack looked up from fixing a gate hinge and said, "You planning to stare that tractor into running, son?" Caleb froze. He looked down at the dirt. No, sir. Jack wiped his hands on a rag. Then come closer. Machines don't mind being looked at, but they prefer a man does it honest. That was the first time Caleb stepped through Jack Mercer's gate. If you still believe one small act of kindness can change a life, subscribe to Old Farmer Jack Stories. Around here, the best stories are not always about the biggest farms. Sometimes they are about the one person who stopped long enough to see somebody everyone else missed. Jack did not ask Caleb too many questions that first day. He did not ask about his parents. He did not ask about his aunt. He did not ask why the boy looked hungry even after school lunch. He just lifted the tarp from the old tractor and said, "Tell me what you see." Caleb swallowed. Cracked distributor cap. Batteries gone. Fuel lines probably bad. Rear tires weak. Carburetor might be stuck. Jack turned his head slowly. "You know what a carburetor is?" Caleb nodded. "My dad fixed engines." Jack looked at him for a long moment, then nodded once. "Well," he said, "then your dad taught you something worth keeping." That single sentence hit Caleb harder than any kindness he had received that year. Most adults only spoke of his father like a sad ending. Jack spoke of him like he had left something behind. From that day on, Caleb came by whenever he could. Jack let him sweep the shop, sort coffee cans full of bolts, wipe tools clean, and hold a flashlight when repairs ran past sunset. He never paid Caleb much. $1 here, a sandwich there, sometimes a jar of beans or a sack of potatoes for him to carry back home. But what Jack gave him most was time. When a neighbor's baler broke, Caleb watched Jack diagnose it. When the old pickup would not start, Caleb learned how to clean terminals. When rain kept them inside, Jack showed him repair manuals with pages stained by oil and years. And every few days, Caleb would drift back to the red tractor under the tarp. Jack noticed. Of course he noticed. By November, money had gotten tight at Jack's place. The summer had been dry. The hay yield was poor. One of his milk cows had gone lame, and the roof repair on the machine shed could not wait much longer. Jack's sister, Ruth, came by one cold morning with a casserole and a list of worries. "You ought to sell that old red tractor," she said, standing in the doorway of the machine shed. "Somebody will give you parts money for it." Jack kept filing a piece of metal smooth. "Maybe." "Not maybe, Jack. You need the money." "I know what I need." Ruth folded her arms. "Do you? Because I see you feeding that Reed boy half the week, letting him fool with tools, and now you're standing over a tractor that has not worked since Carter was president." Jack smiled faintly. "It ran after Carter." "You know what I mean." He did. Everyone knew what she meant. Jack was generous in ways poor men were not expected to be, and that bothered people more than cruelty ever did. A week later, the town held a small farm auction behind Darnell's repair yard. Nothing fancy, just old implements, broken equipment, boxes of tools, cracked tires, spare rims, and 3 tractors in various states of defeat. Jack hauled the red tractor there on a flatbed. Caleb saw it from across the yard and stopped walking. The tarp was gone. The tractor sat exposed in the pale November light, looking worse than ever among men who knew how to price things by what they could strip from them. Caleb did not move. Jack saw him but said nothing. The auctioneer slapped the hood and laughed. "Now, here's a beauty, gentlemen. If anybody wants a tractor-shaped pile of problems, this one's for you." Men chuckled. Someone called, "Does it come with a team of mules to pull it?" Another said, "Best use is park it in a field and let the weeds climb it." Jack stood near the rear tire with his hands in his jacket pockets. Caleb stayed behind the row of men, trying to make himself invisible. The bidding started at $200. No one raised a hand. The auctioneer dropped to $150, then $100, then $50. A man named Earl Pritchard, who farmed 200 acres and talked like every acre had personally praised him, laughed loud enough for everyone to hear. "Jack, you should pay somebody to take that thing." More laughter. Jack looked at Caleb. The boy's eyes were fixed on the tractor, but his face had gone flat, the way a person's face goes when they are trying not to want something. The auctioneer looked around. $50. Anybody? Jack raised his hand. The auctioneer blinked. "Jack, you already own it," Jack said. "I'm withdrawing it." A few men groaned. Earl shouted, "Withdrawing it? For what? Sentimental value?" Jack walked over to the tractor, reached into his pocket, and pulled out the old key. It was not shiny. It was dark and worn smooth at the edges from years of use. Then Jack turned and held it out to Caleb. The whole yard went quiet for half a second. Caleb did not understand. Jack said, "Come here, son." Caleb stepped forward slowly. Jack placed the key in his palm. "This tractor is yours now." The laughter came back twice as loud. Earl slapped his knee. "You hear that? Jack Mercer just gave a dead tractor to a boy with no barn, no money, and no sense." Another man said, "He'll sell the tires by Christmas." Someone else muttered, "That boy can't fix his own coat." Caleb's fingers closed around the key. His ears burned. He wanted to run, but Jack put a hand on his shoulder. He did not raise his voice. He did not argue with the men. He only said one sentence, low enough that Caleb had to lean in to hear it. "A machine ain't useless if a man's still willing to learn from it." Caleb stared at the key. That was the day the whole county laughed. And that was the day Caleb Reed stopped feeling like he had nothing. The tractor did not move under its own power that week. Or the next. Jack hauled it back to his farm because Caleb had nowhere to keep it. They pushed it into the machine shed, cleared a space around it, and wrote a list on cardboard with a carpenter's pencil. Battery, fuel line, oil change, distributor cap, carburetor, spark plugs, rear tire patch, wiring. Jack taped the list to the wall. Caleb looked at it like it was a mountain. Jack said, "Mountains are climbed in steps." The first lesson was patience. Not engines, not tools. Patience. Caleb wanted to fix everything in one day. He wanted the tractor to roar to life so loudly that every man at the auction yard would hear it from town and swallow his words. But broken things did not care about pride. Jack made him start with cleaning. They drained old fuel that smelled like varnish. They pulled the carburetor and laid its pieces on a rag. They cleaned jets so small Caleb had to hold them to the light. They replaced brittle hose. They checked wires, scraped corrosion, and argued gently with bolts that had not moved in years. Some evenings, Caleb's aunt sent word that he had chores at home, and he ran off before supper. Some evenings, Jack packed him food without mentioning it. A ham biscuit wrapped in wax paper, a boiled egg, half a jar of peaches, a piece of pie Ruth had brought. Caleb would say, "I can't take that." Jack would say, "Then carry it for me till you get hungry." By December, winter had settled over Willow Creek. The ground hardened. Frost silvered the fence rails. Smoke rose from chimneys before daylight. Still, Caleb came. His hands cracked from cold and work. His knuckles bled. His school grades improved in math because Jack made him calculate belt sizes, fuel mix, and gear ratios. At school, some boys teased him. "Heard you own a tractor that don't move. Going to drive it to graduation? Maybe it'll run when you're 30. Caleb said nothing, but every afternoon he returned to the machine shed, and Jack kept teaching. He taught him that a stuck part should not be forced until it broke. He taught him that a man should clean a tool before putting it away, even if he was tired. He taught him that old machines remembered rough hands and rewarded careful ones. And slowly Caleb began to change. He stood straighter. He asked questions. He stopped flinching when adults spoke to him. The tractor was still broken, but something inside the boy had started running again. And if you've ever seen someone bloom because one person believed in them, leave a comment for that person. Sometimes people need to know their kindness did not disappear. Sometimes the smallest encouragement becomes the first tool a person ever owns. By March of 1990, the tractor had spark. Not much else, but spark. Jack let Caleb turn the key while he watched the engine. The starter dragged once, then again, then clicked. Caleb's face fell. Jack said, "Again." "It's not going to." "Again." Caleb turned the key. The engine coughed so hard, both of them jumped. A puff of dark smoke shot from the exhaust. Caleb looked at Jack like he had witnessed lightning. Jack tried not to smile. "Well," he said, "it ain't dead." For the next month, they chased problems through the machine like following tracks in snow. Fuel came too fast. Then not fast enough. The timing was off. The old battery drained. The tire patch failed. A wire shorted under the dash. Every solution uncovered another problem. Caleb got angry one evening and threw a wrench against the dirt floor. "I can't fix it." Jack did not scold him. He picked up the wrench, wiped it with a rag, and placed it back in Caleb's hand. "No," Jack said. "You can't fix it angry." Caleb stood breathing hard. Jack pointed to the tractor. "That machine don't care if you're hurt. It don't care if folks laughed. It don't care if your life's been unfair. It only answers what you do next." Caleb looked down. His eyes filled, but he did not cry. Jack softened his voice. Same as a field, same as a life. That night, Caleb stayed until the stars came out. He put the wrench back where it belonged. In May, the tractor started, not beautifully, not cleanly. It shook, sputtered, coughed smoke, and sounded like a coffee can full of gravel rolling downhill. But it started. Caleb stood beside it with both hands over his mouth. Jack leaned against the workbench, arms folded, watching the boy more than the machine. The engine chugged unevenly, then settled into a rough idle. Caleb laughed. It was the first time Jack had heard him laugh like a child. Not a polite laugh, not a nervous laugh, a real one. Jack opened the shed doors and sunlight poured over the red hood. "Climb up," he said. Caleb looked at him. "You mean drive it? You own it, don't you?" Caleb climbed onto the torn seat like it was a throne. Jack stood beside the rear tire and talked him through the clutch. The tractor lurched, then stalled. Caleb panicked. Jack said, "That's one way to stop." They tried again. This time, the tractor moved forward 3 feet, then 10, then across the yard. By the time it rolled past the barn, Ruth was standing on the porch with her hands on her hips, shaking her head and smiling despite herself. The next Saturday, Caleb drove the red tractor to the edge of town. He did not mean to show off. At least, that was what he told Jack. But the route happened to pass Miller's feed store. 3 men were standing outside. One of them was Earl Pritchard. The tractor came down the road slowly. Paint still faded, tire still ugly, exhaust puffing, engine knocking but alive. Caleb sat tall in the seat. Jack followed behind in his pickup, one elbow out the window. Nobody laughed this time. Earl squinted. "Is that the same tractor?" Jack parked, stepped out and said, "I believe it is." Caleb looked straight ahead, but Jack could see the corner of his mouth lift. That was not the end of the story. It was the beginning. Over the next few years, Caleb became known as the boy who could fix things. At first, people brought him small jobs because he charged less than Darnell's shop. a mower that would not start, a chainsaw with a bad pull cord, a tractor light that kept shorting, then bigger things, a hay rake, a cultivator, an old grain truck. By 16, Caleb spent summers working in repair shops. By 18, he left Willow Creek with 2 duffel bags, a toolbox Jack had given him, and the old tractor key still on a ring in his pocket. The red tractor stayed at Jack's farm. Caleb promised he would come back for it. Jack told him, "No hurry. Good machines know how to wait." On the morning Caleb left, he stood by the gate longer than necessary. Jack pretended to check the mailbox. Caleb said, "I don't know how to thank you." Jack looked down the road. You don't thank a man by standing still. You thank him by becoming useful. Caleb nodded. Then he hugged Jack so suddenly the old farmer almost dropped the mail. Jack patted his back once, awkwardly. "Go on now," he said, "before I put you to work." Caleb laughed. Then he left. Years passed the way they do in farm country. Slow when you are living them, fast when you look back. The 1990s came and went. The feed store changed owners. Darnell's repair yard closed after his son moved to Kansas City. The school got a new gym. The gravel roads got wider. Jack's beard went white. His hands stiffened. The farm grew quieter. Ruth passed away one winter after a short illness, and after that, Jack spent more evenings alone on the porch, listening to crickets and distant highway noise. Sometimes a postcard came from Caleb, not often, but enough. One from Missouri, where he was working on combines. One from Nebraska, where he had joined a restoration crew. One from Iowa, where he had opened a small machinery repair business with another man. The handwriting grew steadier over the years. The words changed too. At first, "Still working. I hope you were well." Then, "Fixed a transmission this week and thought of what you said about not forcing stuck parts." Then, "Bought my first shop." Then, "Took on 2 boys for summer work. One reminds me of me." Jack kept every postcard in a cigar box on the mantel, but Caleb did not come back. Not for Christmas. Not for the county fair. Not when the old red tractor's tires finally gave out, and Jack pushed it deeper into the shed. People in town forgot the boy. Some remembered him vaguely. Whatever happened to that Reed kid? Didn't he run off? I heard he got into machinery somewhere. Jack used to let him hang around. Earl Pritchard, older now but still sharp with his opinions, once said at the diner, "I still think Jack wasted that tractor. Boy never even came back for it." Jack heard about that comment. He only smiled. Some men measured gratitude by how quickly it returned. Jack had learned that some seeds took longer underground. By 2024, Jack Mercer was 91 years old. He no longer farmed the way he once had. A neighbor cut his hay. A young man from church checked the fence lines. The porch had been repaired twice, but it still leaned a little, because Jack said a house should keep some of its personality. He walked with a cane on damp mornings. He forgot names sometimes, but never machines. He could still tell which tractor was passing on the county road by the sound of its engine. The old red tractor sat in the shed, covered again by canvas. The paint had faded further. The tires were nearly flat. A bird had once tried to nest under the seat, but Jack never sold it. When asked why, he always said, "It belongs to a boy." People thought that was sad. Jack did not. Then, on a warm Saturday in September, the sound came down the lane. At first, Jack thought it was thunder, but the sky was clear. Then he heard the rhythm of engines. Not one engine. 3. Deep, steady, restored engines rolling over gravel. Jack was sitting on the porch with a cup of coffee cooling beside him. He leaned forward, listening. The engines came closer. A neighbor Tom Willis, who had been fixing a loose board near the chicken coop, stepped out into the yard. What in the world? Dust rose beyond the maple trees. The first tractor came into view, green paint shining, then a red one behind it, then a blue one, all restored, clean, strong, rolling slow and proud, like a parade no one had announced. Tom walked toward the lane. A pickup followed behind the tractors. By then, 2 neighbors had stepped out from across the road. Someone driving by slowed, then stopped. The tractors rolled into Jack Mercer's yard and lined up in front of the old barn. The engines shut off one by one. For a moment, the farm was silent. Then the door of the pickup opened. A man stepped out. He was broad-shouldered, late 40s, with work-worn hands, a short beard, and eyes that still watched everything before asking for anything. Jack gripped the arm of his chair. The man walked toward the porch slowly. He removed his cap. "Mr. Mercer," he said. Jack stared at him. The man smiled, but his eyes were wet. "It's Caleb." Jack did not speak. His mouth opened slightly and his hand rose to his chest. For 35 years, Jack had carried the boy in memory. Now memory was standing in his yard. Caleb climbed the porch steps. For a second, neither of them moved. Then Jack reached out with both hands. Caleb took them carefully like they were something fragile and holy. "You got old," Jack said. Caleb laughed through tears. "Yes, sir. I tried not to, but it caught me." Jack looked past him at the tractors. "What is all this?" Caleb turned. By now, cars had stopped along the road. Neighbors stood near the fence. Someone had called someone else, and Willow Creek was beginning to gather without knowing why. Caleb reached into his jacket and pulled out an old key ring. On it hung a dark, worn key. The same key Jack had placed in his hand in 1989. Jack stared at it. "You kept it?" Caleb nodded. "Every day." Then he reached into the truck and pulled out a faded photograph. The edges were cracked. The color had browned with age. It showed a 13-year-old boy sitting proudly on an ugly red tractor beside a younger Jack Mercer, who stood with one hand on the tire and the other shading his eyes from the sun. Caleb held the photo where Jack could see it. "This was the first thing anybody ever gave me that made me feel like I was supposed to become something." Jack's eyes filled. Caleb turned toward the tractors. "I came back because I owed you an answer." Jack shook his head. "You never owed me anything." "Yes, sir," Caleb said softly. "I did. Not money. Not thanks. An answer." He pointed to the green tractor. "That one is from my shop. First full restoration I ever kept instead of sold." He pointed to the red tractor in the middle. "That one is yours. New engine work, new tires, hydraulics clean. Ready for your place. I know you don't farm like you used to, but a man ought to have a tractor that starts when he asks it to." A few neighbors laughed gently. Jack wiped his face with the back of his hand. Then Caleb pointed to the blue tractor. "And that one is not for either of us." Jack looked at him. Caleb swallowed. "It is for the next kid who needs somewhere to begin." The yard went quiet. Stay with this one, because what came back to Jack's farm 35 years later was bigger than anyone in that town imagined. It was not just 3 tractors. It was proof that kindness can take root in a life, leave town, grow quietly for years, and then come back carrying more than anyone expected. By then, Earl Pritchard had arrived. He was an old man now, bent at the shoulders but still recognizable by the way he stood with his arms folded like judgment. Was a habit his body could not quit. He looked at Caleb, then at Jack, then at the tractors. Someone near the fence whispered, "That's the Reed boy." Another said, "The Orphan." Earl's face changed. Slowly, not dramatically. Not like a villain caught in a lie. More like a man realizing that a joke he had told decades earlier had lived long enough to shame him. Caleb saw him. So did Jack. Nobody spoke of the auction yard at first. Then Caleb turned toward Earl and said, "You were there that day." Earl looked down. "I was. You said I'd sell the tires by Christmas." A few people shifted uncomfortably. Earl took off his cap. "I said worse than that." Caleb nodded. Jack tried to interrupt. "Caleb." But Caleb raised a hand gently. "I'm not here for an apology." Earl looked up. Caleb continued, "I just wanted you to see what he saw." He turned back to Jack. "This man looked at a broken tractor and saw a lesson. He looked at a boy nobody wanted and saw a future. The rest of you saw scrap." The words landed across the yard like a church bell. Jack lowered his head. He had never liked being praised. Caleb knew that. So he knelt beside Jack's chair and spoke only to him. "I built a repair business because of you. I hired boys who had nowhere to go because of you. I kept that old key in my pocket because some days I needed to remember I had been trusted with something." Jack's chin trembled. "I didn't do much." Caleb smiled. "That's what you never understood." He placed the key in Jack's palm. "To me, it was everything." Then Tom Willis, the neighbor, cleared his throat. "What about the old red one in the shed?" Caleb looked toward the machine shed. Jack's eyes followed. The shed door still hung crooked. The canvas still covered the shape inside. Caleb stood. "May I?" Jack nodded. Caleb walked to the shed and slit the door open. Dust moved in the light. There it sat. The original red tractor. Older. Faded. Smaller somehow. Caleb stepped inside and stood beside it for a long moment. No one followed him at first. Then Jack rose slowly from his chair. Tom offered an arm, but Jack waved him off. He walked down the porch steps one careful step at a time. The yard stayed silent as he crossed to the shed. Caleb pulled the canvas back. The tractor looked like a relic from another life. Caleb rested a hand on the hood. "I thought about restoring it before I came," he said. Jack looked at him. "But then I realized it should not be restored without you." Jack gave a small laugh. "At my age, I'm more likely to supervise." "That is exactly what I was hoping." By afternoon, the whole yard had changed. Men who once would have laughed stood around the shed offering tools. Young boys climbed carefully around the blue tractor, asking questions. Women brought sandwiches and lemonade without being asked. Someone found old folding chairs. Someone else swept the shop floor. And for the first time in many years, Jack Mercer's machine shed sounded alive. Caleb opened a toolbox so clean and organized it made Jack whistle. "You always this neat?" Caleb grinned. "A man cleans a tool before putting it away, even if he's tired." Jack looked at him sharply. Caleb's grin softened. "I remember everything." They worked on the old red tractor for 3 days. Not because it was easy, because it mattered. Jack sat in a chair near the front wheel giving instructions. Caleb did the heavier work. Tom fetched parts. 2 teenage boys from town watched, then helped, then got grease on their hands and forgot to look bored. Earl came on the second day with a box of old parts from his barn. He set it down near the door. "Some of these might fit." Jack looked at him. Earl cleared his throat. "I also came to say I was wrong." Caleb wiped his hands. Earl faced him. "I was wrong about you, son." Caleb studied him for a moment, then nodded. "That is enough." But Earl shook his head. "No, it ain't. But it is what I've got." No one clapped. No one made a speech. That would have ruined it. The apology settled quietly into the grease and dust where honest things belonged. On the fourth evening, the old red tractor was ready to try. The whole town did not gather, but enough people came that the yard felt full. Jack sat in the driver's seat. Caleb stood beside him. The old key was in Jack's hand. For a moment, he did not turn it. He looked down at Caleb. "I gave this to a boy once." Caleb nodded. "You gave it to a man, too. He just had to grow into it." Jack put the key in the ignition. The first turn gave a click. The second gave a cough. The third brought the engine to life. The old red tractor shook awake under Jack like it had been waiting all these years to finish its sentence. People cheered. Not loudly at first, then louder. Jack laughed, one hand on the wheel, tears running into the lines of his face. Caleb stood beside the tractor with both hands pressed to the hood. The boy from 1989 and the man from 2024 met in that sound. And in the middle of the yard, with 3 restored tractors behind him and the old red one running again, Jack finally understood what had come back to him. Not machinery, not repayment, not proof that he had been right. Something better, a life. A life he had touched when it was still young enough to be lost. Later, when the sun dropped low and the engines cooled, Caleb gathered the teenagers near the blue tractor. He told them the rule. "This tractor is not for sale. It is not mine. It is not Mr. Mercer's. It belongs to the lesson." One boy frowned. "What does that mean?" Caleb smiled. "It means every summer, one young person who needs a chance gets to work on it, learn on it, and use it. But they don't get to keep it until they understand what it is for." "What is it for?" another asked. Caleb looked toward Jack. Jack answered from the porch. "It is for learning that broken does not mean finished." Nobody said anything for a while. The boys looked at the tractor differently after that. So did the adults. By the next week, people in Willow Creek were telling the story everywhere. At the diner, at church, at the feed store, outside the post office. But the story changed depending on who told it. Some said Caleb came back rich. Some said he owned 10 shops. Some said the tractors were worth more than Jack's whole farm. Those people missed the point. The real story was never about what the tractors were worth. It was about what Jack had given away when. He had almost nothing. He had given Caleb a key, but not just to a tractor, a key to work, a key to patience, a key to dignity, a key to the idea that a boy with no family could still be trusted with a future. A month later, Caleb returned again. This time not with a parade of engines, but with paperwork. He had arranged for repairs to Jack's barn roof. He had set up help for the winter. He had hired a local boy to check on Jack twice a week, not as charity, but as paid work. Jack objected to all of it. Caleb expected that. "You told me to become useful," he said. "I am trying." Jack grumbled, but he signed what needed signing. That winter, the old red tractor was moved into the center of the machine shed, not hidden in the back anymore. The faded photograph was framed and hung above the workbench. Beside it hung the old key. And below both, Caleb placed a small wooden sign. It read, "A machine ain't useless if a man's still willing to learn from it." People came by sometimes to see the tractors, but Jack preferred when they came to hear the story. He would sit on the porch in his worn cap, coffee in hand, and tell it slowly. He told them about the auction yard. He told them about the laughter. He told them about a boy who could hear engines better than grown men could hear truth. He told them about the first time the old tractor coughed smoke. He told them about the day Caleb drove past the feed store, and then he would pause before the end, because that was Jack's way. He wanted people to understand something before he finished. "You never know," he would say. What a person is carrying when they walk through your gate. You might think they need food. You might think they need work. Sometimes what they need most is to be trusted with something. Then he would point toward the machine shed. I gave that boy a broken tractor because it was what I had. He would smile. And he brought back 3 because he understood what it meant. In Willow Creek, the story outlived the season. The blue tractor became the start of a small summer program behind Jack's machine shed. No sign-up forms at first. No fancy name. Just Caleb, Jack, and a few young people who needed somewhere to stand after school. They learned how to change oil, how to clean a carburetor, how to patch a tire, how to listen before assuming a machine was finished. But they also learned other things. Show up when you say you will. Put tools back. Do not laugh at someone trying. Do not call something junk just because you do not know how to fix it. Do not call someone hopeless just because you do not know how to help them. By spring, the blue tractor ran better than it had in years. One of the boys who worked on it asked Caleb if he could become a mechanic someday. Caleb handed him a wrench. Someday starts with what you do next. Jack heard that and looked away, smiling, because it sounded familiar. The last time Caleb visited that year, he found Jack in the shed, sitting beside the old red tractor. The evening light came through the boards in golden lines. Dust floated in the air. Jack had the old photo in his lap. Caleb stood quietly at the doorway. Jack did not look up. I used to wonder if you forgot, he said. Caleb walked in. I never forgot. Jack nodded. I know that now. Caleb sat on an overturned bucket beside him. For a while, neither spoke. Then Jack said, I was afraid I gave you something broken. Caleb looked at the tractor. You did. Jack turned. Caleb smiled. That was why it helped. If you had given me something perfect, I would have only learned how to own it. Because it was broken, I learned how to work. Because it needed patience, I learned patience. Because everybody laughed, I learned not to build my life around their voices. Jack's eyes glistened. Caleb continued, You did not give me a tractor, Mr. Mercer. You gave me proof that I was not scrap. The old farmer covered his face with one hand. Caleb put a hand on his shoulder, just as Jack had done for him in 1989. Outside, the 3 tractors stood in the fading light. The green one, the red one, the blue one. And inside the shed sat the old broken tractor that had started it all. It had not been worthless. It had been waiting for the right hands. So had the boy. And maybe that is the part of the story worth keeping. Not everyone who looks broken is finished. Not every gift has to be expensive to change a life. And not every seed of kindness comes back in the season you expect. Sometimes it takes 35 years. Sometimes it comes back down a gravel lane in the sound of 3 engines. Sometimes it stands in your yard, holding an old photo and a key and says, You believed in me before I knew how to believe in myself. For more rural stories about old machines, hard years, and the kindness people never forget, subscribe to Old Farmer Jack Stories. Because out here, we know one thing for sure. A man may forget what he sold. He may forget what he owned. But he never forgets the day somebody looked at what the world called broken and said, There is still something here worth saving.